So thank you so much for being here today. This is a part of our Ask a Blogger series, where we ask you questions as alumni and you can share your expertise, your experience with students. I'm very excited that tonight's theme is Pride Month. So we're very lucky to have three wonderful alumni representing the LGBT community here with us this evening. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules, out of your beautiful summers to be here for our students. So first of all, welcome. My name is Rebecca. I'm a career advisor in Career and Employment Services, and I am going to be moderating this panel this evening. And I think it's going to be good just to get started with a quick introduction. So share your name, pronouns, your grad year from Puget Sound, the major that you had at Puget Sound, and tell us a little bit more about what you do now. What's your organization and what's your position at your organization? And I'm going to say, let's go ahead and do popcorn style to where whoever feels good or comfortable go first and then the other person dives in.
I can start because I'm not muted. Hi, everybody.
Perfect.
My name's Katie. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I graduated from Puget Sound in 2018 with a major in international political economy and minors in business and Spanish. And then I currently work at a community-based nonprofit. It's called Family Tree Relief Nursery. We do child abuse and neglect prevention work. And I specifically work with predominantly rural families in Oregon who are identified as at risk for child abuse or neglect, who are also on state cash assistance services. So I do a lot of home visiting, parent education, case management, a lot of social worky kind of things. And I guess, so my current title, I'm certified as a community health worker through the state of Oregon. And then, yeah, so that's kind of what I do.
My name is Collin Noble. I graduated in 2019 with a degree in business and economics. And I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. And I currently work at a marketing and business management consultancy called the Spur Group over in Redmond, but I live in Seattle. And I currently am a consultant, which is our mid-tier consultant level position here. And I predominantly work we work with larger tech companies. So my current client is with Microsoft. And so I do a lot of project management support and communication strategy support. So essentially helping folks execute on what they are trying to get done, and then also really take those communications from a strategy perspective and from like an overall look and feel perspective to executive quality. So that's what I help my clients with now. And that's my day-to-day.
Hi there, my name is Caroline Henry. I go by both Caroline and Henry. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. Rose, I'm excited to speak with you about your question later. Definitely felt that. I graduated in 2012 with a major in English and a minor in theater. And I'm currently a senior copywriter at an ad agency in downtown Seattle called Copacino Fujicato. My day-to-day is a little hard to explain. I don't really have a day-to-day. Every day is a little different, but it's a lot of writing and ideating and making things go from an idea to an advertisement that you see in the real world.
I love hearing the stories of what people are up to. Like, I'm impressed by all of you, and I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool. Each of you started talking. So let's dive into some questions, give a little bit more context and background. And since most of our students joining in are either current students or recent alum, and Puget Sound experience is still fresh in their mind, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your Puget Sound experience, your interests you had, maybe jobs you had, internships, involvement maybe while you were at Puget Sound.
We want to just keep our order. Perfect. Okay. So at Puget Sound, I was definitely busy. I worked at the Center for Intercultural and Civic Engagement on the civic engagement side of things and did a lot of community-based work. And I volunteered with some local education nonprofits, so Peace Community Scholars and Communities in Schools. I was involved with Greek life. I played varsity lacrosse. And then I was involved with Peer Allies and ran some of that campus education stuff. Yeah, and then in terms of internships I had while at Puget Sound, I was at Puget Sound for 3 years and interned both summers that I was enrolled. So I spent one summer interning in Madrid with the Red Cross with a youth program. And then I spent my second summer in Rebecca's internship program working with the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project in Tacoma.
Yes, I guess I'll start with more job experience and then move to campus involvement. So for internships, I was in the same program my sophomore summer, and I worked with a local nonprofit mediation agency down on Tacoma Way. And so worked with them over the summer and then continued to volunteer for the following year with them. And then on campus, I worked at the info desk for all 4 years, which was lovely. And I was an RA and an RCC. And then my senior year, I was a part of ASAPS and served as the president. And I recognize some of your names, so I'm sure you're aware. But I don't want to dig into that too much. And then I also was involved in Greek life as well, was involved in Lighthouse, which is a faith community on campus. And I would say, you know, I, from a community perspective, was quite involved in the food scene. I just love eating, so I ate a lot in Tacoma.
Well, I am not alike with either of you in that regard. I feel like I barely did anything in the UPS community while I was there. I was part of the outdoors club my freshman year. I lived in the outdoor dorm, but it was overwhelmingly straight at the time. That was in 2008. So, you know, I'm pretty old. That's okay. So then I found the queer group, whose name has changed a few times since then. And that's mostly how I found my friends at UPS. But as far as community involvement went, I was mostly learning and catering. I wasn't involved with student government at all. I was always being pushed to be more involved, and I probably should have been. But I was busy reading and writing and catering and kayaking. I'm not gonna lie. Probably should have been more involved, but I wasn't.
It sounds like you were really involved in your interests, and that really helped you get to where you are now. So again, go with what your interests are, go with what draws you. And I think, yeah, that's all really inspiring. So diving a little bit deeper into career development. So what would you say, what experiences or relationships that you had while you were at Puget Sound were formative in your career development?
So many. I would say my academic advisor was hugely important to me, Lisa Nunn, who is just an angel. She's incredible. So she was great. I am lucky that I still email her from time to time for life advice. And then also Skylar, who works at SICE, is just another incredible human who really helped me kind of understand my interests and passion for social justice and community-based work, and facilitated so much awesome learning for me in that. And then, yeah, I think my internship opportunities, especially working with the immigrant community and the detained community in Tacoma, was hugely formative to me in understanding what it is that I wanted to be doing and the way that I wanted to be able to participate in my local community.
Yeah, I agree that I found career development in a lot of different areas. And I feel like a lot of folks maybe feel that career development is a very like short and straight line, that, you know, if you have a work study job or an internship, that those things happen. And I will say that my internship and as well my work study were kind of very formative. And I would say my work study position, I had a great mentor. And so that was kind of a big part of my career development. But other areas like academic advisors are really important. And for me as well, I think one, you know, I don't want to repeat too much. So I'll say one that hasn't been mentioned so far is kind of peers that are like a year or two above you. So for me, it was having folks that actually were in the career field for like a year. So essentially, like, I just graduated, and so it's like you pass it down to the next year. And I would say that was huge for me. It's a big reason why I got the job, is because I was able to get a referral. And I mean, I like to say I was qualified as well, but it helps. But peers are a huge one. And then I would say as well for me, I think uh, the student involvement that I was a part of. I think there's a lot of management that's expected in student government. And so that politicking and government piece helped me where I am now in a corporate structure.
Again, I'm going to cite catering as the source of my career development. Mostly because of the connections that I made through catering. You know, I got to know some of the folks in the president's house that way, and some folks from Greek life too, just from setting up so many events with them. And just, you know, you stand around, you talk to people at all sorts of events, and yeah, it was great. And I learned how to, you know, be organized and solve problems on the fly. And it helped me get jobs in food service after I graduated. You know, I graduated in the depths of the recession in 2012, which I'm sure recent grads can strongly identify with. So I feel you there. And having that catering experience was really, really helpful. But Sue Dolan also was a huge help. I got to know her again because of all these catering events that she would also be at. And there was one my senior year where she was like kind of asking me what I was doing after graduation, and I was like, I don't, like, I got a job at Starbucks, like that's all I know right now. And she recommended that I spoke with an alumni who was a copywriter. So I did, and she told me about copywriting and what it's like to work in advertising, and I hung on to that for a few years, and then when I decided I wanted to do something with writing, I came back to that connection, and that's how I found out about advertising school, and that's really what led me into the industry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's a really good segue too, and kind of talking about opportunities post-grad. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you arrived at your current position? So what did your path look like?
Oh man, mine was pretty chaotic, if we're being honest. So I graduated in May, and I was supposed to start a Peace Corps cohort in September. And about 4 weeks before my departure date, I had a bit of like a reckoning with myself, and realized that that was not the right fit for me at that time. So I moved back home with my mom and started applying for jobs. And I knew that I wanted to work specifically with survivors of domestic violence based on my experience working with peer allies on campus. And I got a job working with our local DV agency, and I was there for about a year. And I loved the work and really, really liked working in the community I grew up in. And I liked using the skills I had developed at Puget Sound in a way that felt like it was making an impact in a way that felt community-based and not like savoury. So yeah, I was in that role for about a year, and through that role met a lot of people who work at the organization I'm at now. And I had mentioned to them in passing that I was starting to look for new opportunities. They had said, oh, you should come apply with us. So I did, and transitioned into that role about a year ago.
Yeah, I would say the journey to my current position started when I started at Puget Sound. It was, I was in the business leadership program, and I think that certainly having that disciplinary background helps in consulting. And so that was kind of the start. And then the journey really was continuing to ask peers that graduated, 3, 2, and 1 years ahead of me, how they were liking it. Do they actually enjoy doing consulting? Was it awful? Was it worth it? I think for me, I certainly have like a strong core value around stability. And I think my parents were very excited for me to have this type of position post grad. And so, yeah, I think for me, it when I look back, it's a pretty clear linear direction. But so essentially, junior and senior year, looking to those folks and building relationships so I could get a referral. And then, my senior year, getting a referral and interviewing with the SPUR group. And I would say once I was hired as an associate consultant, and then I was able to be promoted in 5 months. And, really that was through having kind of some great mentors that helped me understand that I was kind of underhired for the position. It's kind of you're fresh out of college, here's the position we're going to put you in. But kind of based off my experience and the skills that I was able to demonstrate, and some mentors, we were able to kind of help me negotiate our promotion process and get to the position where I'm at now, which is great. So that's kind of a pretty easy shot on how I got to where I'm at. Though it wasn't easy. I feel like I was like, oh yeah, it was easy. But I also graduated, didn't have a job for a couple months, felt like I was going to die, and we're fine. But I would say there's definitely, there's such angst and expectation around when you graduate to have a plan, know where you're at. I hated people asking me what's your plan after school. And I'm sure Katie, you loved being able to say, oh, I'm going to the Peace Corps. And then you're like, jokes. So it's wild. And I would say a lot of folks that are in great positions that they absolutely love did not start out in them when they first graduated. A lot of folks take a couple years. One of my good friends who's 2 years ahead of me, she's 3 or 4 years out now, and she just got into her position, or she feels like she's in her career path where she wants to be. So that's all to say, the first job, it kind of needs to support you and support your values currently, but it doesn't need to be a dream job.
Yeah, you just described what I went through, Collin. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I started out as a barista in downtown Seattle. I had a partner in Seattle at the time, so it was a pretty easy move to just go from Tacoma to Seattle. It's the Starbucks on the first floor of the Columbia Tower, so that was my first job out of college. Hated it. Learned how to make coffee, and then moved to an independent coffee shop up on First Hill, which is way more my style. But again, I just needed the stability of knowing that I was going to have a paycheck. So I really just took the first job that was offered to me. And then from there, built little steps and built. And I love being a barista. Looking back, oh wait, I'm gonna read this question. Random question: is Starbucks as supportive of LGBT people as the media portrays them to be? That's a great cue. I was working there in 2012 when you couldn't have piercings, you couldn't have tattoos. I had to take my lip ring out. So I don't know. I've heard that I go to Starbucks a lot now, and the folks who make my coffee seem to be pretty out and proud, but I would ask someone who currently works there, because I feel like they've probably changed a lot since I was there.
And I feel like it depends on this location as well. Totally. Some locations are great, and some of my friends are other ones that they're not as great.
Yeah. But the independent coffee shop I switched to was super supportive. And I had a great time And I wish I would have been a lot easier on myself at that time. I was so worried about putting my English degree to use and figuring out, like, what am I going to do for my life? What is my career going to be? And looking back, like, that was such a fun year. And I wish I would have gone easier on myself and allowed myself to have more fun and not worry so much, because you're gonna move on when it's the right time. Yeah, so from there I went to advertising school in Minneapolis after speaking with an alum who had done the same thing, and then my plan was to move to Minneapolis and move back to Seattle within a year, but it ended up taking 5 years, because the advertising community in Seattle is like this big. And people who get a job in advertising here tend to stay in it, and the shops just aren't that big. So, cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, you can get an entry level ad position, not easily, but easier than in Seattle. So let's see, I'll try and do this quickly. Ad school, then I paused and worked in San Francisco for 9 months at Facebook with a friend who also went to UPS. That was totally just a UPS connection. Moved back to Minneapolis for an internship in advertising, then worked at 3 agencies in Minneapolis. Meanwhile, was interviewing at agencies in Seattle that entire time and just not getting jobs. So finally, once I was mid-level, after having been in the industry for 5 years, I got my current position at Copacino 2 years ago. Or I had been in the industry for 4 years, so I'm in my 6th year. I'm finally doing what I want to do and living where I want to live. And it took me, 5 years, but it's not always linear, and I had a lot of fun along the way.
Awesome. So the last question kind of touched a little bit about finding a supportive organization for specifically the LGBTQ community. So is there anything specifically that you looked for in an organization when you were in your job search?
So I would say the first job I took out of college, I did it really wrong. And I ended up in an organization where I was being directly supervised by someone who consistently was making homophobic and transphobic remarks. And like, I was not in a place where I could come out to my supervisor because I didn't want to get fired or bullied. And so when I started looking for new jobs, a big question I asked in interviews was, what are your organizational values and how do you enact them? And then I also asked about the equity and diversity work, or equity and inclusion work, whatever way you want to frame that. But the kind of work they were doing with politicized identities, not only in the clients that we served, but how they supported their staff. So when I interviewed for the role I'm in now, I asked them about their organizational values, and they turned around and said, actually, we're going to do a core values exercise as a part of our interview process. And I was like, great, sold. Like, that's awesome. You have an understanding of what this looks like. And I would say my current employer isn't perfect, but they're doing the work to get better, which is really what I think is super important, is finding a place in an organization where, I guess for some context, I don't live in Seattle. I live in like rural Oregon. So it's definitely a different community out here. And it often feels a lot more like you're developing a community of allies rather than a community of folks who share your identity. But I think just finding an organization that you feel like respects you as a human, but also has a strong sense of what their organizational values are, not only in terms of how are we going to perform our service, but how are we going to support our employees.
I think that's the kind of similar response that I would have. I think I can speak more to the corporate space. And so if that's something you're interested in, or if you're looking at larger organizations or ones that self-identify in more of like the corporate and private industry sphere, I would say depending on the size of the organization, oftentimes they will have some sort of statement around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and as well, for consultancies in particular, but others, they'll have employee resource groups, or some, they'll put it together in some way, and basically it's like, like for at Spur, I co-founded a employee resource group for LGBTQ plus folks called Sprout, like Spur Out. But so like, then is that on the website? Can you ask about things like that, etc.? So, and I find those all in the corporate world to be quite performative. So I think also you need to understand, if you're stepping into a corporate space, that folks are certainly typically more highly educated and thus more liberal and maybe more accepting, but there are certainly limits to that. And I think as well, kind of senior leadership in many of these organizations don't align with those same values all the time. So I think part of that is kind of asking to, doing your research, looking at their website, looking at their leadership and asking about their senior leadership. I think oftentimes that is where you can see culture most reflected from a corporate standpoint, is who are the folks that are actually in leadership there. And for me, being a person of color, that's something I look for, but I think some folks are kind of obviously very supportive of the queer community or are part of it. And if you looked at their LinkedIn profiles, they typically support organizations, give money, are on a board for something related. So you can often find that. I think for me as well, at work, I think about like how I choose to show up, and how much of that, it's how much am I expecting my work to validate like every facet of my identity? And I think maybe that's a bit pessimistic and, maybe not ideal, but for me, I think I took a very pessimistic view of what support I would be able to receive, especially in a corporate space. Given that I've worked with great nonprofits and great community-based organizations, and knowing that even they kind of being more grassroots still had their stuff to work through, I couldn't imagine a corporate space would be that much better. It would just be more resourced. And so I think for me, that's where I landed. But thankfully, I've been in a space that has been extremely supportive of my queer identity and has allowed me to create an employee resource group for that, and for us to have kind of regular programming for the queer folks at our office, and that are my peers, and as well some community members. So, Lambert House is a LGBTQ youth organization here in Seattle, and we like collectively, like we have an annual fundraiser, and I think we raised like $35,000 for them last year. So you can also look and see how corporations give their treasure as well. But I would say that's all to say, depending on the space, just be understanding of where you need to get support for that identity, and you should be able to show up as your full self, but also be realistic about the structures that are out there.
Yeah, everything Katie and Collin said and more. I think they're right on there with, especially doing your own research before you even take an interview can save you a lot of time. Again, I think, I'm going to make myself sound old, but I feel like you all are so ahead of the game by even caring about that right now. Like, I never really thought about my queerness at work until after the 2016 election. I felt like between 2012 and 2016, I just wanted a job. I didn't care really about the values or who was running the show. And because of that, the first couple agencies I was at, I wasn't very involved or out at work. I wasn't not out, but I would say it was not celebrated really. And then, after the 2016 election, I remember going to work the day after Trump was elected, and like, it was just so obvious that I was working somewhere that wasn't very supportive. Because like, that half of us were crying and just couldn't even focus, and the other half didn't even understand why we were being emotional. But again, this was Minneapolis in 2016, and shortly after, I interviewed at a different agency, literally across the street, called Carmichael Lynch. And one of the things they mentioned was their employee resource group for LGBTQ plus employees. And I was like, wait, what? That's a thing? Like, I had never even heard of that before. And my recruiter was gay. And so right away I was like, oh my God, I can really be out here. And even still, I was dating someone who identifies as trans there. And I remember getting questions like, wait, you have a boyfriend? But I thought you were gay. And like, and I wasn't out as non-binary yet. So there was just a whole lot of not good stuff going on. But once I started at Carmichael Lynch and the badness of our current administration was sinking in, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to work somewhere that not only tolerates me, but celebrates me as a queer person. And so when I was looking at agencies in Seattle, the reason Copsino Fujikato stuck out to me so much, one is because they do great work, but two, the name is quite long because the founders are Jim Copsino, who's a straight white Italian guy, and Betty Fujikato, who is a Japanese woman, who's also straight. And I was thrilled because I really hadn't come across any agencies that weren't led by cishet white dudes. And so I brought that up in my interview and made that a point. And it ended up helping me because they cared that I cared, which is a really long way of saying, yeah, I think it's really important to do your homework so that you end up in a place where you are celebrated.
Thank you so much. We have a question. If you find out that your employer is not supportive, how would you go about talking to them?
I'm going to keep it brief because I think my answer is not going to be that helpful, because my answer is if you don't feel like you are in a position where you have the capacity or the bandwidth or the institutional power or whatever it is to like make actionable change or be an advocate for yourself, then like get the heck out of there. I think that what I found in my experience of like coming into a position I really loved and realizing that my employer was not going to be supportive of me is that like ultimately, and again, I'm in nonprofit work, so it's really different, right, than like a corporate world where things just function a little differently in that world than they do in my world. But kind of recognizing like, if this isn't going to work, something else will, and you will find somewhere else that will align with your values in a better way. So my advice is like, if you find out that your employer is not supportive and you don't imagine that they're not supportive, if your employer is not supportive because they don't know, then see if they're willing to engage in education. But if your employer is not supportive because they have prejudices and biases and beliefs that are unchangeable, just leave would be my advice.
Yeah, I don't think I would add too much to that. I agree. It's, if you find out that they're actively not supportive, it's kind of like, you know, grin and bear it and find another place. I would say, yeah, if it's that case of like they are really well-intentioned and open to that conversation and you have the ability to chat, then by all means do it. And I would say kind of, you know, tactically what I would do in that situation is find a supportive, you know, find folks that are supportive of you that are higher up the chain and start building coalition both vertically that way and then horizontally. So are there other folks that are at your level that kind of share that same view? And then as you start building that coalition, you can start thinking about what are those changes that you actually want to see. And so you can make recommendations and you use the horizontal piece to kind of crowdsource what changes we want to see, typically from, the lowest levels of positions, and then you use that vertical funnel to actually have folks land the message and start to enact those changes. And so that's the way I might approach that if you really felt you could, or there was an opportunity or like a specific policy you wanted changed. So I'm thinking about right now, we are, the United States is kind of going through another racial reckoning with the kind of resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and our company, and particularly our extremely white leadership, is trying to figure out what to do and how to respond and to reflect. And we're quite aware that they were like not being anti-racist. They thought they were being not racist. And so they're trying to figure out, what does it mean for us to do more anti-racist work, have more anti-racist policy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you do a lot of reading, you may come to the conclusion that capitalism is not going to get us anywhere near anti-racism. However, you got to pay your bills. So that's all to say, tactically, crowdsource horizontally, get the message up vertically. But if it's not going to be worth it, if you don't have the time, like, just don't. The worst thing you could do is waste months and months, years on trying to change an organization when you could just leave and go somewhere else.
Yeah, Collin and Katie, again, like, just, I have no notes. The answers were perfect. I would just add, like, yeah, the more you can find mentors and people who will champion you at work, the better. And I would hope that this is a given, but like, it's never your job to change your company or leadership's minds or to educate anyone. If you have the energy and the desire to dive into that, great. But like, that's something that I've had to learn over and over and over, is that it's, my straight coworkers aren't getting paid to educate anyone on their straightness. So it's not my job to educate anyone on queerness either. And there are a lot of straight people who I've been better about reaching out to lately. If I experience a microaggression or if someone misgenders me, I will reach out to them and say, hey, next time this guy misgenders me, would you mind correcting them? Because I'm sick of doing it. And I work in a really supportive agency, thankfully, where it's working. And it saves me so much emotional time or emotional labor to not have to go through a lot of those steps, and to really give, the people who say they want to be allies to the queer community, to give them a job to save my own energy.
Thank you so much. So I think this really relates, finding support networks, specifically LGBT support networks, whether it's in your organization, whether it's mentors, whether it's in the town or city that you live in. What advice do you have for building support networks, whether it's in your industry or in your organization?
Again, I live in like the whitest, straightest, middle of nowhere town. So it's been hard, I think, is kind of my answer. My partner is an incredible human, and she is a sounding, she's been a really awesome sounding board. Sorry, I'm like saying that someone probably also can relate to a lot of my experiences here. She's been a really awesome sounding board for me, and she's a little older than I am and has experienced, lived in the South for a while and has had a whole other experience with struggling to build supportive networks. So it's nice to have her put things in perspective for me. But I think, yeah, I have really great friends. I have really supportive friends. And I think something that I'm learning is I have a lot of friends who I've met in professional settings who maybe haven't done still learning, but they're willing to. And I think that has been really awesome to recognize that, like, I can kind of inform, correct, educate, and like the people in my life are willing to engage with that. So that is one way I've been doing that. I think the other thing that has been really awesome for me in terms of forming a professional network of support is we have an equity and diversity committee at my organization. And I have a lot of thoughts about how they named it, but it's not my decision. So, but I've actually been chairing that this calendar year. So that's been really awesome because I've gotten to kind of lead conversations in a way that it makes me feel like I can be heard, but also call out inequity where I'm seeing it, not just for our queer employees, but for our employees of color and our single parent employees and stuff like that. So that's been a nice way for me to kind of find those networks of support, is recognizing that people are really willing to do the learning if you ask them to.
I would say for me, yeah, I still kind of stay connected with my close friends I had in college, particularly folks in the community. But as far as new connections, I think for me, like generally making friends and like professional networking and all of that is that, like, that's fine. Plenty of people will give you answers for that. So I kind of want to focus on finding other queer folks in a new space. And I think the first one is like at work, as you get to know more people, I just feel like, you know, the gays, we find each other, you know, the queer, like we just, there's some magnetism to our identity and shared experience. And I don't know, like, it wasn't, I think I also present as like extremely queer, especially when I open my mouth. And so I think people, they knew, I knew, we found each other. But if that's not really the case for you, then I think, you know, I think we're all aware kind of how to listen for each other in the community. So just be thoughtful of that and make it a priority to meet new people so you can have chances to hear who in your organization might be an ally or a member of the community, and then build a genuine relationship with them that like makes sense. I would say I would also go to community events. Like there's wonderful folks that are putting together programming for the community. I mean, Seattle is kind of, you know, it's like our own Pacific Northwest Mecca, but I think as well, like, and so like I'm originally from Boise, Idaho, which, you know, bummer on a lot of ways, but also was great. And I'd say it's just kind of putting yourself out there and like going to an event, even if it's like, is this really for me? I don't know, but like I'll go. Or for example, like when my company was doing that fundraiser for Lambert House, you know, finding ways to engage in their volunteering. So can you support those organizations with your time and labor, particularly as well, like your expertise? So as like for me as a project manager and marketing consultant, are there ways that I can help those community members, and then dig in further? And then more on the like, you know, very like professional service professionally thing is like there's a lot of conferences. So for example, one of my good friends at work was telling me about, there's a conference going this week called Lesbians in Tech, and so there's some great talks and a lot of folks that she has been able to connect with there. So there's groups, there's like big corporate groups and conferences and things like that, there's small community-based things, and it's really just like getting over that awkwardness of going and just doing it. So bring a buddy if you must, or just like really take the plunge and like one event, you know, just try one event in the new city and see how it goes. Or even Tacoma. I feel like I did not get out and about with the community in Tacoma. So if you're in Tacoma still, get into it.
I just want to clarify, are you looking for answers of like queer support at work or just like in your city? Because I have different answers.
Together of, you know, there's at work specifically, and there's, I think it's so incredible that Collin created an employee resource group. Like that is, I'm not surprised because you're an incredible leader. But also kind of building that support in a city. So like, let's say you move to a new city, how do you build that support, network?
Yeah, I would again echo Collin on the ERG. My work kind of had one in the works, but we didn't have a name, and they never met. So when I got to Seattle, I suggested meeting more frequently, and then gave them a name. So we're called EDGE, which stands for Empowering Diversity and Growing Equity. And it also kind of speaks to, like, you know, we're on the edge of capitalism. We're tipping over into some new land that no one knows what we're doing. But that's a different conversation. But yeah, the employee resource group has been really great. Also, just to, especially when I was newer, as a space where people let their guard down a little bit more, and the conversations go from, like, what are you doing this weekend, to more into, like, who are you as a human? So yeah, the more it seems really annoying and daunting at first, but yeah, just like Collin said, like, you gotta talk yourself into going to those events. And now they're even more awkward because they're all on Zoom, but you get over it at some point.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to our students. I know there is one question that is in the chat right now that I really want to get to. So let's, what advice do you have for students in the community who are just starting out in their first professional role, whether it's an internship or a full-time position?
I thought a lot about this question, and I kept coming back to, like, I feel like I don't have any advice that's actually helpful, which maybe is, like, helpful. Like, I am 2 years post-grad. I am super lost. I have no idea what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to grad school because I panicked and thought maybe grad school will help. So I think that I know I talked a little bit in my, like, advice bio thing I emailed to Rebecca about the idea that just being flexible, I think, is really important, especially now, but always. There is so much that's changing about, like, our national culture, our work culture, the way that a degree is valued, the way that a liberal arts degree is valued. So I think be really flexible if that is a strength of yours. If that's not a strength of yours and organization is more of your strength, have lots of organized plans, like many of them, because things will change. Yeah, I think that would be my advice. I also think if you're stepping into an organization where you feel like you have to compromise yourself or your values or not show up as you'd like to show up, it's okay to leave. It's just a place you work. Ultimately, you don't owe them anything. Like, you are what's important.
Yes, all of that. Just retweet. I would say for me, two things. The first one is work is not, and in my opinion, should not be your identity. I think that's, yeah, maybe when I say it, it's like, duh, yeah. But often, we've come from these institutions, these places where we spend a lot of time where it is our identity. So, like, right now, you go to UPS, like, you're a Puget Sound student or you're a Puget Sound recent grad. And before that, you were like, I went to Capitol High School and we were the Capitol Eagles. And that was our identity. And even though I wasn't super, like, into all the rah-rah, that was the identity I held, that I was a high school student, that I did that. And now that I went to college and I was a Puget Sound student in Tacoma, et cetera, et cetera. So when you move into the work world, it's important that you're driving towards this career and this passion and something that's really important to you. But I often find that a lot of my peers and myself as well kind of still tried to move in that, like, kind of like, this is my new identity, it's my new home, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to, like, let you know that kind of the world expands and you have more time to explore interests, build community, et cetera, in and out of work. And so, not to say that you should just, like, go to work and just punch in, punch out. It shouldn't be something you care about. But it's also to say that, the more you can build more facets of yourself when work maybe isn't as great or harder, or, you know, maybe you're just there for the paycheck or whatever it may be, then it's not kind of like the only part of your life. And if it's sinking, like you aren't sinking or as hard. So I definitely found that when I was going through hard times at work, in the first couple of months I was there, I just like felt awful about myself, and my self-esteem was just like in the trash. And so find other things you're interested in, and it doesn't have to be huge, but just like let yourself be multifaceted is the first piece I'd share. And like start a podcast. We're in the middle of a pandemic, everyone's making, like, just start a podcast, you know, just do something. And then the second piece I'd say is be intentional. So your career and your life is now in your hands, and there's not, you know, as we've all mentioned, there's not like a game plan for us after this, right? Like there isn't a syllabus, there isn't kind of clear direction of like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to get a degree, etc. And again, as I say this to you, I remember when I was in your shoes and I was like, yeah, duh, like, of course. But I really had to like learn and like work through what it means to be intentional and to like have a plan. And for me, it was figuring out that like no one, like maybe there's some mentors that I can connect with, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be like, so if you do all these things, you'll get promoted. There may be kind of an obvious checklist of like skills that you need to be able to do, but ultimately the speed at which you progress, the speed at which you move forward towards whatever your goals are, is going to be dictated by you. So I guess it's like, don't let kind of the world happen and you feel that you don't have agency in your life, because you do. You can quit, you can find a new job, you can get promoted, you can do all of these things. And I just want to remind you that intentionality is a very deciding factor in being able to kind of be happy post-grad, in my opinion. So I would encourage those two things.
That's tough to follow. I don't know what else I can add. I'll just try to frame it a different way. Also, Collin, I really wish you could have been my life coach when I was 22. Man, I really could have used all of that advice. I was so lost and anxious and just so worried every day about what I was going to do and where I was going to live and how I was going to make it all happen and how am I going to pay my student loans and, you know, all of that pressure. And I've since gotten better at managing stress because I decided I wanted to work in a really stressful industry. Still working on it, but I would also offer to just find ways to be really, really patient and kind with yourself, because this is a really stressful time in the world, and being a new graduate is stressful, and then being a queer graduate is also stressful. And man, I was just so hard on myself, and I think I did have a lot of fun, but I think I would have ended up in the same place even if I had just been a little nicer to myself. And, you know, I didn't realize I was non-binary till I was like 27. And then I got top surgery when I was 29, and I started T when I was 30, because I was so obsessed with getting the career, getting the benefits, like making sure my life was in order, as if I was like looking at the hierarchy of needs. It was like I was like doing the little checks as I went, but it doesn't need to be that intense. So yeah, don't be as mean to yourself as I was when I was 22.
Thank you all so much. So there's at least one question. If there's any other questions, feel free to use the chat. When applying for internships, it always makes me nervous when they ask my gender. I'm non-binary, but have a traditionally feminine name and appearance. So I always get the impression that they'll think, oh, we're hiring a female employee. What should I do in this case?
I can grab that one if you all are okay with that. So Rose, I identify with you not only because you also identify as non-binary, but because my middle name is Rose. So I I have a very feminine name, and part of the reason I haven't changed it is because I am trying to recognize the duality of so many things right now, but also the masculine and the feminine. And my last name is Henry, and it is a first name, so I go by both. And some people are really confused by that. Most people are totally fine with it. And again, I've only been out as non-binary for a few years, but I tend to just put in my own gender box when there isn't one. Like I'll go in and edit the PDF and just put non-binary and start that conversation. And for example, just today, our chief strategist was going over some culture survey results at my work, and they wanted to divide the data by gender. And so he called me and he was like, hey, I don't know how to do this, like, because I'm the only non-binary person at my work. So all of my answers would have been really obvious if they had divided it into three. And so I asked him to put me in with the female identified answers, only because then you could say this is the group of male identified people and this is everyone else. Because I felt like my answers probably would have not been the same as theirs. So what should you do? I hope my tangent kind of answered that. But I would, as much as you're comfortable with, just not be afraid to, you're allowed to ask for another gender option, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If they're only giving you two, you can ask for another one.
I think there's not
So-
much. Mine's
gonna
really quick.
I was just going to say, as of this week, last week, the Supreme Court said, like, you can't be fired for that shit. So.
Period. Yeah, I would just say you also can choose not to check the box, and they can ask you about it later, and you can say my gender wasn't there, etc. But for most of the time, it's like it's something you bring up with HR. So honestly, I think I would defer absolutely to what has been shared. But if you are kind of just sitting there like, I don't know what to do, just leave it empty. If they want you to fill in, they'll do it. But by and large, I don't think there's people that have so much demographic data not listed at our company, and like HR is not going to push too hard. I mean, they might want the data, but for internships, I have the feeling that you might be able to get away with it. Which maybe that's bad advice, but that's what I think.
I think your advice was wonderful. All of your advice. It looks like we are done with questions, and we are at time, so I'm going to be respectful of your time. There's a lot of thank you within the chat right now. I want to wish you all happy Pride. I thank you so much for being here, for being a resource for our students. I think representation is so important to have, specifically when thinking about futures. I know each of you are on LinkedIn. Would you be willing or have questions sent to you via message, connection requests, things like that from Puget Sound students?
Yes, please do, and actually do connect with us. This is how I got my job. Henry said that's how they got a job somewhere. Like you really use the connections. It's not gross. It's the hustle. You just gotta do it.
Sorry, yeah. I just pasted my LinkedIn in the chat, so you don't even have to search that hard. It's right there.
Wonderful. This is not it for events that we have that we were featuring LGBTQ alumni. For our Ask Night, we always ask our alumni, are there any aspects of your identity that you want to share? And that can really help to find some other LGBTQ folks to connect with. We do the same for Take a Lawyer to Work, which is going to look really different this year because it's all going to be virtual. And then we're continuing to do programs as well. So we love to connect our Puget Sound Logger students, our recent alum, with our alumni and really create connections that way. So thank you once again to our students who joined in this evening, as well as our 3 fabulous, wonderful alumni who took their time out of their day to be here. I appreciate all of you and really grateful that you're part of the Puget Sound community.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful rest of your evening. And hang around. I'm going to stop the recording here. And then if you have any questions or if you want to chat really